Before clocks spoke in steady ticks, before hours were divided into sharp, numbered pieces, night arrived quietly in early America. It came not with alarms or schedules, but with the soft dimming of the sky and the gradual cooling of the air. People did not hurry toward sleep. They eased into it, guided by instinct, habit, and the subtle signals of the natural world. As the sun slipped behind distant trees or low hills, shadows stretched gently across fields and dirt roads. The final tasks of the day were completed without urgency. A gate was closed, a lantern was lit, a pot was moved from fire to table. There was no sense of falling behind because time itself did not chase anyone. Inside simple homes made of wood and stone, evenings unfolded at an unhurried pace. Candle flames flickered softly, casting warm pools of light that barely reached the corners of the room. These flames did not mark minutes, they marked mood. When the wick burned low, it was a quiet suggestion rather than a command. The night was ready, rest was near. People gathered close, not because they had planned to, but because darkness naturally drew them inward. Words were spoken slowly, often followed by long pauses. Silence was not uncomfortable then. It was familiar. It was expected. In those pauses, thoughts drifted freely, and tired minds began to loosen their grip on the day. Without clocks, time was felt rather than measured. It lived in the body, in the heaviness of limbs after labor, in the steady rhythm of breath once work was done, in the way eyelids gradually grew warm and heavy. Sleep did not need to be scheduled. It arrived when it was ready, and people welcomed it without resistance. Outside, the world settled into its own quiet rhythm. Crickets began their soft, repetitive songs. Wind moved gently through tall grass or bare branches, depending on the season. Somewhere in the distance, an owl might call, not as a disturbance, but as part of the night's calm reassurance that everything was as it should be. These sounds were not background noise. They were companions. They reminded listeners that they were part of something larger and slower than themselves. Nature did not rush, and neither did the people who lived alongside it. In this time before ticking clocks, the concept of late barely existed at night. There was no pressure to wake at a precise hour. Morning would arrive when the light returned, just as it always had. Trust in this cycle was complete. The sun had never failed to rise before, and there was no reason to believe it would start now. Beds were simple, often handmade, filled with straw or soft layers of cloth. Yet they offered something modern comfort sometimes struggles to provide: permission to rest without guilt. Lying down was not an act of escape from responsibility. It was a natural conclusion to the day, as ordinary and necessary as breathing. As bodies relaxed into stillness, minds followed. Thoughts slowed, no longer jumping from one concern to another. There were fewer worries to replay, fewer plans to rehearse. Life moved at a pace that allowed the mind to finish its work before sleep arrived, and when sleep came, it came deeply. Dreams, when remembered, were shaped by the rhythms of daily life: fields, forests, familiar faces, the sound of rain on a roof. These dreams did not compete with the waking world. They flowed gently alongside it, another expression of a life lived close to natural time. In these quiet nights, there was no glowing dial reminding anyone how much rest they had lost or gained, no countdown to morning, only darkness, stillness, and the slow, reassuring passage from wakefulness into sleep. The absence of clocks did not mean confusion, it meant freedom. Freedom from constant awareness of passing minutes, freedom to linger in moments, freedom to rest when rest was needed. Evenings were not divided into segments, they were whole experiences. A shared meal blended seamlessly into conversation, which blended into silence, which blended into sleep. There were no sharp edges between these moments, only smooth transitions guided by the body and the fading light. This way of living did not feel primitive to those who experienced it. It felt complete. Time was not something to manage, it was something to inhabit. As you imagine these nights now, allow yourself to borrow their pace. There is no need to measure this moment, no need to track how long it takes to relax. Just as those early evenings unfolded naturally, so can this one. Let your breathing slow, as if guided by candlelight rather than numbers. Let your thoughts soften, like sounds drifting farther away as night deepens. You do not need to stay alert. Nothing is required of you now. The world you are imagining trusted the night, and tonight you can too. As time once moved slowly, it can feel slow again, right here, right now. And in that slowness, rest becomes easy, sleep becomes gentle, and the quiet carries you exactly where you need to be. For a long while, time in the New World remained something that followed the sun. It rose and set, stretched and softened, expanding in summer and drawing inward during winter. But slowly, almost quietly, a new idea began to take shape, an idea that time could be divided, counted, and gently guided by human hands. The earliest signs of measured hours did not arrive with noise or announcement. They came modestly, carried across the Atlantic with settlers who brought familiar objects from distant homes. Among chests of clothing and simple tools were timepieces unlike anything most colonists had seen before. They were not common and they were not precise by modern standards, but they represented a shift, a way of thinking about time as something visible and shared. At first, these early clocks were rare guests in the New World. They appeared in meeting houses, churches, and the homes of community leaders. Their faces were often simple, sometimes marked with only a few numbers. Some had a single hand sweeping slowly across the dial, moving at a pace that felt thoughtful rather than urgent. When these clocks were first set in place, people did not gather around them anxiously. Instead, they approached with curiosity. The steady movement of the hand, the gentle sound of gears within, offered reassurance. It was not demanding attention, it was offering guidance. Measured time did not replace natural rhythms overnight. Instead, it settled alongside them. Sunrise still mattered, the changing seasons still shaped daily life, but now there was another reference point, something steady even when clouds covered the sky or winter shortened the day. In small towns and villages, the presence of a clock created a shared sense of order. It helped coordinate gatherings and mark important moments, yet it did so without urgency. Hours were not chased, they were acknowledged. The sound of early timekeeping was subtle, a faint tick, a soft click, often barely audible beyond the room where the clock stood. It did not dominate the space, it blended into it, becoming another quiet companion of the evening. For many, this was the first time hours felt tangible. Before, time passed invisibly, known only by light and shadow. Now it could be seen moving steadily forward, reminding listeners not of what was lost, but of what continued. At night, these clocks took on a different character. In the stillness of darkened rooms, their soft ticking became more noticeable. It was not loud enough to disturb rest, but steady enough to be comforting, a reminder that while the body slept, the world remained gently in motion. People adjusted to measured hours without resistance because the change was gradual. There were no strict schedules imposed on daily life. Instead, clocks served as quiet guides, helping communities align without forcing them to hurry. Craftsmen began to study these instruments closely. They observed the movement of gears, the balance of weights, the careful arrangement of hands and dials. Curiosity grew, and with it, the desire to create timepieces closer to home. But in these early days, clocks were still precious. They were cared for carefully, wound by hand, adjusted gently. A clock out of rhythm was not an inconvenience, it was a responsibility. Keeping time accurate required patience and attention, qualities that were already familiar to those living close to the land. Measured hours brought a sense of shared experience. When a bell rang or a clock marked a new hour, it connected people across distance. Somewhere else in the same town, someone else noticed the same moment. Time became something held in common. Evenings changed subtly. Candles were still lit at dusk, but now there was awareness of how long they burned. Meals still unfolded slowly, but there was comfort in knowing when night deepened into its later hours. Yet, despite this new awareness, nights did not lose their calm. The presence of clocks did not steal rest. They simply added a gentle structure to it. Sleep still arrived naturally, guided by tired bodies and quiet minds. In homes where clocks stood, they were often placed where they could be seen but not stared at. They were part of the room, not its center. Their purpose was to serve, not to command. As you imagine these early measured hours, notice how different they feel from modern timekeeping. There is no pressure in their movement, no urgency in their sound. Each hour passes like a calm wave, steady and predictable. This was time introduced with respect. It did not demand control over life, it offered consistency, a shared rhythm that supported community rather than rushing it. Measured hours did not yet rule the night. Darkness still belonged to rest. When candlelight faded and conversation softened, clocks continued their quiet work without expectation. There was no need to watch them closely. As sleep approached, the ticking became part of the background, blending with the breath, the settling of wood, the distant sounds of night. It was a reassurance rather than a reminder. You can let this sense of gentle structure settle into your own thoughts now. Imagine time not as something pressing forward, but as something holding you safely in place. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to measure. Like those early evenings, this moment can unfold without hurry. Let the idea of measured hours soften, becoming less about numbers and more about rhythm, a steady movement that continues whether you are awake or asleep. As the new world slowly welcomed the idea of measured time, it did so without losing its calm. And tonight, you can welcome that same balance, structure without pressure, rhythm without rush. Allow your breathing to align with that steady pace, slow, steady, unconcerned with counting. Time is moving gently, and you are free to rest within it. Long before clocks became common, the first true guide to order in the new world was light itself. Sunlight shaped the day without speaking, and shadows answered quietly, stretching and retreating as hours passed. This partnership between brightness and darkness offered a rhythm that felt natural, steady, and easy to trust. Each morning began not with a signal, but with a gradual showing. Light crept gently through small windows, touching wooden floors and simple furniture. There was no sudden beginning to the day. Wakefulness arrived softly, carried in on pale rays that moved slowly across the room. People rose when the light felt ready. The day did not begin at a fixed moment, it unfolded. This allowed the body and mind to wake together without strain or urgency. Outside, sunlight revealed the world layer by layer. Dew shimmered on grass, mist lifted from fields. Trees cast long, patient shadows that shifted almost too slowly to notice. These movements were not tracked, they were felt. Shadows became quiet companions. Their length told stories without words. When they stretched long across the ground, it meant the day was opening or closing. When they shortened, it meant the sun stood high and work moved steadily forward. This relationship between light and shadow created the earliest sense of order. It did not divide time into strict portions. Instead, it offered guidance, a feeling of when to begin, when to pause, and when to rest. In homes and workshops, light determined activity. Tasks that required focus were done when sunlight was strong. As the day softened, work slowed naturally. There was no struggle against fading light. It was accepted as a gentle signal to transition. Windows were small but meaningful. They framed the passing day like living pictures. Light entered at different angles, marking progress more effectively than numbers ever could. As evening approached, shadows grew longer and deeper. They crept along walls and floors, signaling a shift without demand. This change did not bring anxiety, it brought relief. The most demanding parts of the day were over. Candles were lit not to extend the day, but to honor its closing. Their glow was softer than sunlight, inviting quiet rather than effort. Shadows danced differently now, moving gently with each flicker of flame. This softer light encouraged reflection. Conversations slowed, movements became deliberate. There was no need to hurry because the day had already given what it could. In these moments, the first sense of shared order became clear. Everyone in the household felt the same transition. The same light faded for all. This created a quiet unity, a shared understanding of when to wind down. Outdoors, the sky told its own story. Colors deepened slowly, blending from pale blue to warmer tones before settling into night. Each stage arrived without announcement, yet no one missed it. This predictable sequence brought comfort. The day always followed the same gentle arc. Light rose, light showed the way, light withdrew, and rest followed naturally. Even before clocks, people trusted this order completely. There was no fear of losing time, no worry about being off schedule. Nature kept time faithfully. Shadows, in particular, offered a kind of patience that modern timekeeping often lacks. They never jumped ahead, they never rushed. They moved at a pace that matched human awareness. As you imagine these slow shifts now, allow your own awareness to soften. You do not need to mark progress. You can simply notice change without effort. Imagine sunlight warming the ground, then slowly releasing it. Imagine shadows stretching calmly, without intention, without urgency. There is nothing to accomplish, only transitions to observe. Inside, the air cooled gently as daylight faded. Sounds softened, even footsteps grew quieter. The world seemed to exhale. This was the first sense of order, not imposed, but observed. It was a rhythm discovered rather than invented. As measured time began to arrive, this natural order remained its foundation. Clocks did not replace sunlight and shadow, they learned from them. Early timekeeping borrowed its calm from nature. Hours were meant to follow light, not overpower it. At night, when darkness finally settled, there was no confusion, The day had ended clearly and kindly. Rest was not delayed or negotiated. It was welcomed. People lay down knowing that the same order would return. Light would find them again. Shadows would trace familiar paths. Nothing was uncertain. You can borrow this certainty now, this trust in slow transitions. Let your thoughts follow the same gentle arc as the day once did. Bright and active thoughts can fade. Quieter ones can remain, drifting easily. There is no need to hold on to the day. Like sunlight withdrawing, it can leave without effort. As shadows lengthen in your imagination, allow your awareness to grow softer. Let the sense of order hold you without pressure. This is not a schedule, it is a rhythm, one that has existed long before clocks and continues even now. And as that rhythm carries you forward, sleep becomes simply the next natural step. No signal required, no measurement needed, just a gentle transition from light to shadow to rest. As daylight withdrew and evening settled over the early towns of the New World, another kind of light quietly took its place. In small workshops tucked behind homes or along narrow streets, candles were lit one by one. Their glow did not compete with the sun that had passed. It offered something different: focus, warmth, and calm. These workshops were modest spaces, wooden benches worn smooth by years of use, simple tools arranged with care, the scent of wood shavings, oil, and metal resting gently in the air. Nothing here was hurried. Candlelight invited patience. Clockmakers and craftsmen understood this light well. It softened edges and reduced distractions. Under its glow, the world narrowed to what rested within arm's reach: a gear, a spring, a carefully shaped piece of wood or brass. Each detail mattered, and candlelight revealed them slowly. The flame itself became a quiet companion. It flickered gently with the movement of air, reminding the craftsman to move calmly. Sudden gestures could disturb the light. Slow, steady hands kept everything balanced. In these workshops, time was both the subject and the atmosphere. The very objects being created were meant to measure hours, yet their creation required freedom from strict measurement. Ironically, making timekeepers demanded the ability to forget time altogether. The ticking that would one day guide households began here in silence. Gears were tested by touch before sound. Pieces were fitted together without rush, adjusted by instinct as much as by sight. Candlelight encouraged this attentiveness. It revealed imperfections gently rather than harshly. Shadows softened mistakes, allowing corrections without frustration. Often, only 1 or 2 candles were needed. Their small pools of light defined the workspace. Beyond that circle, the room faded into darkness, removing unnecessary distraction. The craftsman's world became simple and focused. Outside, night sounds drifted in through small windows or open doors, the distant call of insects, the soft movement of wind. These sounds blended naturally with the quiet work, never interrupting, always supporting. Workshops at night were places of calm dedication. There was no audience, no pressure to finish quickly. Progress was measured by feel rather than by clock. Each component of a clock required attention, but not strain. Hands learned to recognize balance, weight, and alignment intuitively. This was knowledge gained slowly, passed down through observation and practice. In these candlelit spaces, patience was not a virtue, it was a necessity. Rushing led to mistakes. calm led to harmony. As hours passed, craftsmen remained comfortable with stillness. They worked until their senses suggested it was time to stop. When candle stubs burned low, it was not a deadline, but a suggestion. The soft shadows cast by moving hands and tools gave the space a gentle rhythm. Movement and pause flowed together naturally. For those who worked there, these workshops offered more than livelihood. They offered quiet, a place where the noise of the day did not reach, where attention could settle fully. Clockmaking in this era was not about speed or scale. It was about reliability and care. Each piece carried the calm of its creation into the home it would one day serve. When a clock finally began to tick, it carried with it the memory of candlelight. That steady rhythm echoed the measured movements that formed it. Evening workshops also reflected a broader culture of respect for nighttime. Work done by candlelight was thoughtful and limited. No one tried to turn night into day. This respect protected rest. It allowed craftsmen to finish their tasks without disturbing the natural cycle of light and darkness. As you imagine these workshops now, notice the softness of the scene, the absence of sharp sounds, the way light and shadow cooperate. Allow your mind to enter that circle of candlelight. Let distractions fall into the darkness beyond it. There is nothing you need to hurry. No pressure to complete anything, just steady focus, then gentle release. The craftsman eventually sets tools aside. Candle flames are extinguished carefully. The room returns to darkness, ready for rest. This transition is unforced. Work ends because the night invites sleep. You can follow that invitation now. Let your thoughts slow as if guided by candlelight. Let your awareness narrow gently, focusing only on comfort and calm. Just as those workshops closed for the night, your mind can set its tools down. The work of the day is complete, and in the quiet that remains, rest becomes easy. In the quiet workshops of early America, there was a skill that could not be taught by instruction alone. It was learned slowly through patience, repetition, and attention. Clockmakers often said that before hands could shape time, they first had to listen to it. This listening did not involve words or music. It was a quiet awareness developed over countless hours of careful work. The steady movement of gears, the balance of weights, the gentle resistance of springs. All of these spoke softly to those who paid attention. At first, apprentices watched more than they worked. They observed how experienced hands moved, never hurried, never unsure. Each motion had purpose, guided by feel rather than force. Tools were held lightly, as if heavy pressure might disrupt the conversation happening between metal and wood. A file touched a surface just enough to smooth it. A screw turned slowly, guided by touch. Listening to time meant noticing subtle differences, the way a gear settled into place, the slight change in sound when alignment was correct, the nearly silent satisfaction when movement flowed without interruption. These cues were easy to miss if one rushed, but when hands moved slowly, showing respect for the materials, time revealed itself. In these workshops, silence was not empty, it was full of information. The absence of noise made it easier to hear what mattered. Craftsmen often worked without speaking for long stretches, not because conversation was unwelcome, but because focus felt natural. Words would have disrupted the quiet dialogue between hands and mechanism. As skills developed, listening became instinctive. A clockmaker could tell by sound alone if something was out of balance. A pause in the rhythm, a hesitation in the tick. These signs were never ignored. Correcting them required patience. Adjustments were made in small increments. Nothing was forced. The goal was harmony, not speed. Hands learned to move in rhythm with the work. There was no separation between the craftsman and the object. They responded to each other. This sensitivity carried beyond the workshop. Clockmakers became people who noticed rhythms everywhere. The way footsteps echoed differently at night, the pace of breathing during rest, the slow unfolding of evening. Listening to time shaped how they lived. It encouraged calm. It rewarded attentiveness. As clocks became more common, their presence in homes brought that same quiet awareness. People listened to their clocks not with anxiety, but with familiarity. The sound of ticking was not intrusive. It blended into the environment, offering reassurance that things were moving as they should. At night, that steady rhythm often became part of sleep itself. It did not disturb rest, it supported it, a gentle reminder of continuity. Listening to time did not mean watching it closely, it meant trusting its flow. This trust allowed craftsmen to step away when needed. They knew the work would wait. Time was patient. Apprentices eventually developed the same sensitivity. Their hands learned to respond without thought. Movements became smooth, economical, precise. This knowledge was not written down. It passed from one generation to the next through observation and practice. In a world that moved slowly, there was space to learn deeply. As you imagine these hands now, consider how different this approach feels from modern urgency. There is no rush to master anything. Learning unfolds naturally. You can allow your own hands to relax now. Notice how they rest, how little effort is needed. Listening to time tonight does not require attention, it simply invites awareness. Notice your breath, its steady rhythm. No need to change it, just observe. This is the same listening those craftsmen practiced, awareness without judgment. Time continues whether you listen or not, but when you do, it feels gentler. Allow the rhythm around you to support rest. Let ticking fade into the background. There is nothing to fix, nothing to adjust. Hands that learned to listen to time also learned when to stop. And now you can stop listening. Let awareness soften. Let rhythm carry you. Sleep arrives not as an event, but as a continuation. Time will keep moving quietly, just as it always has, and you are free to rest within it. In the early workshops of the New World, materials were chosen with care. Nothing was wasted, nothing was rushed. Wood and brass became the quiet partners of time, shaped patiently by hands that respected both substance and purpose. Wood was often the first element to be touched. It arrived in the workshop already familiar, drawn from local forests, seasoned slowly, and understood by feel. Its grain told a story of growth shaped by wind, sun, and season. Craftsmen listened to these stories, selecting pieces that felt balanced and calm. When cut and shaped, wood responded gently. It did not demand force. It allowed correction. A careful hand could guide it into precise forms without struggle. Wooden cases, frames, and gears carried warmth into the finished clock, grounding time in something natural and living. Brass brought a different quality. Cool and steady, it reflected candlelight softly, never sharply. Its surface invited attention, revealing fine details slowly as light moved across it. Brass was chosen for its reliability. It held shape, it resisted wear, it aged gracefully. Working with brass required patience. Files moved lightly, smoothing edges bit by bit. Holes were drilled with care. Each motion was deliberate, guided by experience rather than urgency. The combination of wood and brass created balance. One softened the other. Together, they produced mechanisms that moved smoothly and quietly. Quiet precision was the goal, not speed, not volume. The best clocks were those that did their work without drawing attention. In these early timepieces, precision was not about perfection, it was about consistency, a steady movement that could be trusted. Craftsmen tested this consistency gently. They watched hands move, they listened for rhythm, they adjusted weight and alignment until everything felt settled. The process required time, and time was willingly given. There was no pressure to produce quickly. Each clock was made to last, not to multiply. In candlelit workshops, the subtle differences between materials became clear. Wood absorbed sound, brass carried it softly. Together, they created a balanced tone, never harsh, never intrusive. This attention to sound mattered deeply. Clocks were meant to live in homes. They would share space with sleep, conversation, and quiet thought. A loud or uneven tick would have been unwelcome. Gentle rhythm was essential. Precision also extended to how pieces fit together. Nothing was forced. Parts were shaped until they belonged. This belonging created reliability. A clock that moved easily required less correction. It asked little of its owner. As years passed, wood and brass aged together. Surfaces softened, edges rounded. The clock settled into its role as a companion rather than a tool. In this way, early American clocks reflected the values of their makers: durability, calm, balance. As you imagine these materials now, notice how they feel: the warmth of wood, the cool steadiness of brass. Let your mind linger on their textures, smooth surfaces, subtle weight. There is comfort in objects made with care. They hold the calm of their creation. Allow that calm to settle into you. Precision does not have to feel sharp. It can feel quiet, reassuring, like steady breathing, like a heartbeat. Nothing here demands attention. Everything works together. Just as wood and brass support each other, your thoughts can settle without effort. There is no need to analyze. Simply notice. The workshop fades. Candlelight softens. The clock is complete. Its movement continues quietly through the night, and you are free to rest. In the growing towns and quiet villages of early America, clockmakers rarely stood in the spotlight. Their names were not widely known, and their work was seldom celebrated beyond the communities they served. Yet their presence was steady and their influence gentle, shaping daily life in ways that felt natural and reassuring. These clockmakers lived among their neighbors. They shared the same rhythms of day and night, the same seasonal changes, the same calm expectations. Their workshops were often attached to their homes or tucked along a familiar street where passers-by nodded in quiet recognition. There was no sense of urgency in their trade. People brought clocks for repair with patience, knowing that careful work took time. A clock left in a workshop was not forgotten. It was being listened to, understood, and guided back into harmony. Small-town clockmakers knew their customers personally. They understood where each clock would live, near a hearth, in a hallway, or in a quiet bedroom. This knowledge influenced how they worked. Every repair was done with consideration for the space it would return to. Their days followed a steady rhythm. Morning light opened the workshop, midday brought focused work, and evening invited careful finishing. When night arrived, tools were set aside without hesitation. This balance between work and rest defined their legacy. They did not try to extend the day unnaturally. They respected the limits of light and attention. Over time, these craftsmen became trusted figures, not because they spoke loudly, but because their work spoke softly and consistently. A clock repaired by familiar hands carried more than accurate time. It carried reassurance. As towns grew and changed, these clockmakers remained anchors of continuity. Their shops did not change quickly. Tools stayed in familiar places. Methods evolved slowly, guided by experience rather than trend. Apprentices learned by watching. They absorbed not only technique, but temperament. Calm was taught without words. This approach ensured that the craft remained grounded. Even as measured time became more common, its handling stayed gentle. Small-town clocks did not demand attention. They blended into daily life. At night, their steady ticking offered comfort, a reminder that something reliable continued quietly in the background. Many of these clockmakers never left records of their work. Their legacy lived on through the clocks themselves, still ticking decades later, still marking time without complaint. In farmhouses, meeting halls, and modest homes, these clocks became silent witnesses to generations of life. They observed without interfering. This quiet presence reflected the values of their makers: consistency, care, respect for rest. As you imagine these small towns now, notice the stillness of evening, shops closing, lamps dimming, clocks settling into their nightly rhythm. There is nothing demanding your attention, just a sense of continuity. Legacy does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hums quietly in the background. These clockmakers understood that. They did not seek recognition, they sought balance. And that balance carried forward long after workshops closed and hands set tools aside. Tonight, you can rest within that same gentle legacy. Let the idea of quiet craftsmanship soften your thoughts. There is no need to remember names, only the feeling remains. Steady, calm, reliable. As the night deepens, allow your awareness to drift. The clocks keep time, and you are free to sleep. Progress did not arrive in the new world with a roar. It came quietly, often unnoticed at first, carried on small changes that blended into daily life. Among these changes was a new sound, soft, steady, and almost easy to ignore. The gentle ticking of clocks became the sound of progress, not loud enough to interrupt, but constant enough to reassure. This sound was never meant to command attention. It existed in the background, marking moments without asking anyone to rush. In homes and meeting places, it joined the natural chorus of daily life. Footsteps on wooden floors, wind against windows, low voices at evening. The tick of a clock was not sharp. It was rounded, softened by wood and distance. Its rhythm was predictable, unchanging, and comforting. People grew accustomed to it slowly. At first, it was a curiosity. Then it became familiar. Soon it was barely noticed, yet deeply missed when absent. This was the nature of progress in this era. It did not disrupt, it supported. As towns expanded and communities became more organized, clocks helped coordinate life gently. Gatherings began with more consistency. Tasks aligned more easily, yet no one felt hurried. The sound of ticking did not speed up the day. It offered structure without pressure. At night, this sound took on a special role. When the world grew quiet, the clock's rhythm became more noticeable, but never intrusive. It filled silence without disturbing it. For many, this steady sound made sleep easier. It provided a sense of continuity, a reminder that everything was working as it should. Progress did not mean abandoning old rhythms. Sunlight still guided mornings, shadows still shaped evenings. The clock simply joined these cues, adding another layer of calm order. In workshops, clockmakers refined this sound carefully. They listened not only for accuracy, but for tone. A harsh tick was adjusted, a smooth one was preserved. This attention reflected a deeper understanding. Sound affects rest. A well-made clock respected the quiet of night. As more clocks entered homes, their sound became part of the shared environment. Different houses had slightly different rhythms, but all shared the same intention: steady, unobtrusive guidance. The sound of progress was never meant to wake anyone up. It was meant to watch while others slept. This gentle presence allowed people to relax into rest, knowing that time was moving evenly without surprise. In this way, progress supported trust. Trust that the night would pass, that morning would arrive, that nothing important would be missed. As you imagine this sound now, let it settle into your awareness without effort. There is no need to focus on it, just let it exist. Like breathing, like a heartbeat. Progress does not need to feel urgent. It can be quiet. It can sound like a soft tick in the distance. This understanding shaped early American life in subtle ways. It encouraged patience. It rewarded steadiness. Progress became something lived with, not something chased. As you lie here now, you can borrow this perspective. There is no need to hurry toward sleep. It will come naturally. Time is moving steadily without demand. The soft sound of progress continues, whether you listen or not, and you are free to rest within it. As clocks became more familiar in the New World, they found their places not in grand halls alone, but in the heart of everyday life. They settled into farmhouses and meeting halls, spaces shaped by shared purpose and steady routines. In these places, clocks did not stand apart, they belonged. In farmhouses, life followed the land. Mornings began with light filtering through windows, and evenings ended when darkness gathered. The arrival of a clock did not replace this rhythm, it simply joined it, offering gentle guidance when skies were cloudy or seasons shifted. A farmhouse clock often rested in a central room, near the hearth or along a sturdy wall. Its presence was quiet. The case blended with the wood around it, familiar and unassuming. Families did not watch these clocks closely. They glanced at them briefly, trusting their steady movement. Time was acknowledged, not monitored. The sound of a clock in a farmhouse was part of a larger symphony. The crackle of firewood, the soft movement of animals outside, the wind passing through open fields. The tick fit naturally among these sounds. At night, when work was done and lamps were dimmed, the clock continued its quiet task. It did not disturb sleep. It offered reassurance. In these homes, sleep came easily. The day's labor had followed natural rhythms, and rest was welcomed without hesitation. Meeting halls, too, embraced clocks with calm respect. These were places where communities gathered, not for urgency, but for connection. A clock in a meeting hall helped coordinate shared moments. It marked beginnings and endings gently, without haste. When gatherings concluded, the clock remained, watching over empty benches and quiet rooms. These halls held conversations, decisions, and moments of reflection. The clock's presence supported order without imposing it. People trusted these timepieces because they were made with care, often by someone they knew. This familiarity created comfort. The tick in a meeting hall was often softer than expected. Walls absorbed sound, space softened it. As evening approached and the hall emptied, the clock became the sole voice in the room, steady and patient. This sound carried a sense of continuity. It reminded listeners that even when spaces were empty, time flowed evenly. In both farmhouses and meeting halls, clocks adapted to their surroundings. They did not dominate, they blended. This adaptability reflected the broader culture of the time. Progress adjusted to life, not the other way around. As you imagine these spaces now, picture their stillness at night. Lamps extinguished, doors closed gently. The clock remains, shows no concern. It continues its work. You can let that image settle into your thoughts. There is nothing to attend to, nothing to prepare for, just steady presence. Like the clocks in those familiar spaces, your own sense of time can relax. You do not need to watch the minutes pass. Sleep will arrive naturally. The farmhouse rests, the meeting hall grows quiet, and you are free to follow the same gentle rhythm into rest. In the quiet rhythm of early American life, knowledge was rarely hurried. It moved slowly, carefully, from one set of hands to another. This was especially true in the craft of timekeeping, where understanding could not be rushed, and wisdom was learned through presence rather than instruction. Clockmakers did not teach through long explanations. Instead, they taught by example. An apprentice learned first by watching, standing nearby, observing how tools were held, how movements were measured, and how patience guided every decision. This method of learning created trust. Knowledge was not forced, it was offered when readiness appeared. Generations worked side by side, sharing hours without measuring them. Days passed with a quiet sense of continuity. The same bench used by one pair of hands was used by another, carrying memory through wear and touch. Each generation respected what came before. New ideas were welcomed, but they were tested gently. Nothing replaced tradition without understanding it first. This approach ensured that the craft remained grounded. Skills evolved slowly, guided by experience rather than urgency. Passing knowledge also meant passing values, patience, attention, respect for rest. These were learned not from words, but from daily practice. Clockmakers learned when to stop working as carefully as they learned when to begin. This balance protected both the craft and the craftsman. As apprentices matured, they developed their own sensitivity. Their hands learned to listen. Their movements grew confident without becoming rushed. Eventually, roles reversed. The learner became the guide. Knowledge flowed onward, uninterrupted. This quiet transfer of understanding created stability. Even as towns changed and technology advanced, the core principles remained intact. Clocks made under this tradition carried the calm of their creation. They were steady, reliable, and unobtrusive. In homes, these clocks became familiar companions, trusted across generations. This continuity extended beyond the workshop. Families shared routines shaped by steady timekeeping. Children grew up hearing the same gentle tick that guided their parents. In this way, knowledge moved outward, influencing daily life subtly. As you imagine this passing of wisdom now, notice how unforced it feels. Nothing is rushed, nothing is lost. This slow exchange creates security. You can allow yourself to rest in that feeling. There is no need to remember details, just the sense of continuity, like a steady rhythm passed from breath to breath. Time flows gently from one moment to the next, and you are free to let go. Knowledge continues quietly without your attention. Sleep comes naturally, and the rhythm carries on. In early American life, time was measured, but it was not chased. Hours existed to offer guidance, not pressure. The steady movement of clocks supported daily routines while leaving space for life to unfold naturally. People did not hurry through moments, they lived inside them. A measured hour was simply a marker, a gentle suggestion of where the day stood. It did not demand attention or action. It allowed people to notice the present without feeling pulled away from it. In homes, tasks flowed smoothly from one to the next. Meals were prepared when they were ready, not when a clock insisted. Conversations ended when they felt complete, not when minutes ran out. Measured time provided reassurance. It offered structure without urgency. This approach allowed moments to stretch comfortably. There was time to finish a thought, time to complete a task without strain, time to rest fully. Even work was shaped by this philosophy. Craftsmen focused deeply, knowing that careful progress mattered more than speed. Mistakes were not feared, they were corrected calmly. This sense of ease carried into the evening. As night approached, measured hours did not interfere with rest. They simply continued their quiet movement in the background. Sleep arrived without resistance. At night, people trusted that time would continue while they rested. There was no need to monitor it. This trust created deep rest. As you imagine this rhythm now, notice how different it feels from modern urgency. There is no countdown, no pressure. You can allow yourself to slow. Let your breathing follow a natural pace. No need to count. Moments unfold one after another, gently. Measured time does not hurry you, it supports you, like a calm guide walking alongside, never pulling ahead. This is time as companionship, not command. Allow that companionship to settle around you. Nothing is required of you now. Sleep can arrive naturally, just as it always has. Time will keep moving, quietly and steadily, and you are free to rest within it. As timekeeping became more familiar across the New World, something subtle began to take shape alongside it. Beyond the steady movement of hands and gears, a quiet confidence grew. It was not loud or boastful. It settled gently into workshops and homes, forming what would later be recognized as an American craft identity. This identity was shaped by patience and necessity. Early craftsmen did not seek to imitate distant traditions exactly. They learned from them, respected them, and then adapted them to the materials, landscapes, and rhythms of their own lives. American clockmakers worked with what was close at hand: local wood, familiar tools, knowledge passed through observation rather than instruction. These influences shaped objects that felt grounded and practical. The clocks they made reflected the environment they came from. They were sturdy without being heavy, precise without being fragile, quiet without being absent. This balance became a defining feature. American craft did not aim to impress, it aimed to endure. Workshops across towns and villages developed their own subtle styles, a slightly different case shape, a familiar tone in the ticking. These variations were not planned. They emerged naturally from repeated practice. Craftsmen took pride in this quiet individuality, not as a statement, but as a reflection of care. The rise of this identity was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, one finished piece at a time. Each clock carried the calm confidence of its maker. There was no rush to define what American craftsmanship should be. It revealed itself through consistency. People noticed this without naming it. They trusted locally made objects. They felt comfortable with them. This trust extended beyond clocks. It shaped expectations of quality, reliability, and balance. Craft identity also shaped how time was experienced. American-made clocks continued the tradition of gentle guidance rather than urgency. They respected rest. This was not accidental. It reflected values carried through generations of practice. As communities grew, these values remained steady. Change arrived, but it did not erase the calm foundation. Craft identity became something lived rather than described. As you imagine this quiet rise now, notice how it feels. There is no need for recognition, just a sense of steadiness. Identity forms naturally when care is repeated over time. You can allow that idea to settle into your thoughts. There is no need to define yourself in this moment, no need to achieve. Just rest within the steady rhythm of continuity. Time moves quietly forward. Craft continues its calm work, and you are free to sleep. In the early workshops and homes of the New World, silence was not something to be filled. It was something to be understood. When a clock ran smoothly, it did not demand attention. Its work was done best when it nearly disappeared into the quiet of the room. Silence was the sign of success. A well-made clock did not interrupt conversation or rest. It did not compete with the sounds of life. Instead, it blended into them so completely that its presence was felt rather than heard. Craftsmen listened carefully for what was missing rather than what was present. No sudden clicks, no uneven pauses, no sharp tones breaking the calm. When silence surrounded the ticking, everything was working as it should. This understanding shaped how clocks were built and cared for. Adjustments were made until the sound softened, until movement became nearly invisible. Silence allowed trust to form. People trusted what did not draw attention to itself. In homes, silence created space for rest. At night, when lamps were dimmed and voices lowered, the clock continued quietly, asking nothing of those who slept nearby. This quiet presence reassured sleepers that time moved steadily without interruption. Silence also shaped how craftsmen worked. Workshops were places of gentle concentration. Tools were used carefully. Movements were deliberate. Loud work belonged to daylight. Night invited quiet. This respect for silence protected both the craft and the people who practiced it. Silence was not empty. It was full of subtle cues, a smooth rhythm, a steady pace, the absence of strain. This kind of silence allowed deeper listening. Craftsmen could sense imbalance through feel rather than sound. As clocks entered more homes, this expectation followed them. A clock that disturbed sleep was adjusted or moved. Silence was valued. As you imagine this now, notice the calm that comes from absence of noise. There is nothing to respond to, nothing to fix, just steady presence. Allow your own environment to soften. Notice the quiet around you. Even small sounds fade into the background. Time continues without demand. Silence means everything is working. Your breathing is steady. Your body knows how to rest. Nothing needs your attention. Let silence hold you. Sleep comes easily. Many of the clockmakers who shaped early American life left no record of their names. They signed no plaques and sought no recognition beyond a job done well. And yet their work remains, quietly marking time long after their hands have rested. In farmhouses, meeting halls, and small-town homes, their clocks continued to move steadily. They watched generations pass. They witnessed change without comment. These clocks did not speak of who made them. They spoke only of care. The absence of names did not lessen the value of the craft. In some ways, it strengthened it. The focus remained on function, balance, and reliability, not on reputation. Craftsmanship became a shared inheritance rather than a personal signature. Each clock carried the same quiet promise: time would move evenly without interruption. This promise endured because it was built into every decision: the choice of materials, the shaping of parts, the careful adjustments made in candlelit workshops. These makers understood that their work would live beyond them. That understanding shaped how they worked. There was no rush to finish, no corners cut. A clock was made to last not just years, but lifetimes. As time passed, these objects blended deeper into daily life. They became familiar companions, trusted presences. Families adjusted their routines around them without conscious thought. The clocks asked for nothing more than occasional care. In return, they offered consistency. The makers themselves faded quietly from memory, just as they would have expected. Their names were not attached to the ticking that continued long after they were gone, but their values remained embedded in every movement: patience, balance, respect for rest. These values did not disappear. They echoed softly in the way time was experienced. As the world changed and speed increased, these clocks remained steady reminders of a slower pace. They did not resist change, they simply continued. This continuity offered comfort. Even when surrounded by noise, these clocks held onto quiet. As you imagine these enduring objects now, notice how they feel: solid, calm, reliable. They do not seek attention. They simply exist, doing what they were made to do. This is the nature of enduring craft. It survives without effort. It remains useful without demanding recognition. You can allow this idea to settle gently into your thoughts. There is no need to be remembered for rest to matter. There is no need to leave a mark to be at peace. Like those forgotten names, you can let go. Time continues its quiet work. The craft endures, and you are free to sleep. As the story of early timekeeping gently comes to rest, what remains is not the ticking of clocks, but the feeling they carried: a steady rhythm, a quiet assurance, a way of moving through life that allowed rest to arrive naturally, without effort or resistance. In the past, time was something people lived inside, not something they chased. Nights unfolded slowly, guided by fading light and familiar sounds. Sleep was not something to achieve, it was something to receive. This rhythm still exists. It has not disappeared. It waits patiently beneath the surface of modern life, ready to be remembered. The clocks of early America were never meant to hurry anyone. They marked time softly, supporting rest rather than interrupting it. Their steady movement reflected trust in the night, in the body, in the certainty of morning's return. As you imagine these clocks now, picture them in quiet rooms, farmhouses at rest, meeting halls empty, workshops dark and still. The clocks continue their gentle work, asking nothing of anyone. This is the rhythm you are invited to rest within tonight. There is no need to follow the story closely now, no need to remember details. The purpose has already been fulfilled. You can allow the past to carry you the way it once carried those who trusted the night without question. Breathing slows naturally, muscles soften, thoughts drift like shadows lengthening at dusk. Nothing needs your attention. The rhythm continues steady and kind. In this rhythm, sleep is not a destination, it is a continuation. Time moves forward quietly, whether you are awake or asleep, and so you are free to let go, free to rest without watching the clock, free to trust the night. As the past settles gently into the present, you can settle too. The rhythm remains, and sleep comes easily.